We also invest very, very heavily in our people. And so we have a really sort of robust and well developed kind of coaching and mentoring program that goes throughout the year and is tied to sort of annual goals and growth and things like that. And so that, each individual has their personal set of growth goals, and we work really hard to make sure that the opportunities the firm has align with, and we're able to connect people in with their own personal growth opportunities.
It's really smart. It's really smart. Well, if we jump right in, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So, I'm William Duff, and founder of William Duff Architects. And my background is, I guess I could start at the beginning. My mother was a writer and a poet, and my father was an engineer, and professor, and both my parents were teachers at some points in their lives. And yeah, my father had a specialty in solar. I grew up I was born in the Bay Area, but I actually grew up most of my life in Colorado. Went back east to school to Cornell University. And then after getting my architecture degree there, I felt pretty, confident and competent as a designer, but how it all went together was still a bit of a mystery for me, in terms of the actual construction. So I went and got a master's in construction management to try to fill in that gap. And then after that, embarked on my career.
I saw that on your LinkedIn. So that's pretty cool. So you studied architecture as undergrad, but knew that this path you needed some CM. So you went and got a master's in construction management.
Yeah, I don't know if I knew that right away. I look back at why did I go to architecture school in the first place? And because people have asked me that question before. And I remember I was probably in sixth grade, and it's always, everyone I think can trace it back to something arbitrary that just kind of makes there's a little switch that goes off in your head. And I was in sixth grade, and one of my mother's friends was, talking to me, and she's like, oh, you have the hands of an architect. And I was like, oh, architect, interesting, and then I'm like, I'd learn more about that. And then it just sort of I think that's where that seed, at least I can trace that as far back as I can trace it. And then I started thinking about that more. And I always had an interest in the craft of architect, of building, the tactility. And so that's been a piece of how I've approached architecture from the beginning, not just developing designs or drawings or models, which of course I love doing, but also, like being in, taking part in the building, or being, connected and touching and, having a tactile connection to rebar and concrete and wood and, carpet and glazing and, all that sort of thing. And, and just really being in touch with all the components of architecture. I think that's really helped. That's been a big piece of shaping how I approach architecture.
Gotcha. It's funny you say that, because I think everybody has that moment that they can kind of point to in their life and say, well, this is why I went down this particular path. But almost everybody I talk to, and when they talk about architecture, it's a calling, right? It's something that, you just kind of feel like that's who you are, and you just need to express it in this way. It's not a profession that you take on to go make $1 million necessarily, or, for maybe a number of other reasons. It's kind of this endeavor that people spend their lives, being a part of.
Right. Yeah. I can think of some different junctures as well where, this is a profession that I think tests you, and, and it is a calling, because, I remember, there's times in school where it's like, oh man, like this is hard, or everyone's out, like, partying, and here I am in studio, and or looking for a job, and like getting a great lead, and connecting and calling that person, and then saying like, oh, why would you want to be an architect? This is a rough life, right? And the people that become architects, because really this is a great life, but you work hard. I mean, you really work hard, but it's really rewarding work. But the people who become architects, they persevere through those things, and and it is the calling. Like it's I think it's it's important to know, and explore, and really test, is this what you want to do?
Right. Right. That's another central theme I'm hearing, which is at least one person who tried to talk them out of becoming an architect for whatever reason, right? Whether it was the amount of
Yep.
hours, or, the living that you would make, or, whatever it was, there was always a reason. But everybody I've talked to is very happy they didn't take that advice early on, and now they've ended up where they're at. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the other one I like is I saw a survey, it's I think it was like they have this scale, and it's like satisfaction with compensation, and how rewarding do you think your profession is? And one end of the spectrum is like attorneys are very satisfied with how much they're getting paid, but they're miserable. They don't like what they do. And architects, generally, like, oh, they won't want to be paid more, but they're really satisfied with what they do. And if you're faced with that choice, which one do you pick?
Right.
I think that being you only get to live one life, and so doing something that you find rewarding and makes you happy is that is, you're sort of winning the game when you do
Right. Right. That fulfillment, right? That it is cliche that, money cannot buy happiness, but that level of fulfillment, I see that in so many people in the design world. And it's not as common in other areas like lawyers, and, even I've talked to some doctors and things like that. But I know I thought about going to law school myself, and I didn't. And I always ask lawyers whenever I meet them, we're talking, I say, well, would you do it again? Right? Or if your kid wanted to become a lawyer, would you support it, or would you try to talk it out of them? And most of them wouldn't do it again. And I had a friend of mine, he got real with me one time, and he said, here's the problem, Zach, is I've got 3 kids who are, I think, 10, 12, and 14. And I'm sitting there on a Saturday morning, and when I should be spending time with them, I'm thinking about billable hours, right? Because if I can bill 3 hours today, that's 3 hours less I have to work during the week, and I can feel like I'm getting ahead, not falling behind. And that was very vulnerable of him to tell me that, but it was just like, ooh, man, like, it doesn't sound.
I know. And I mean, we all, we all love to bash on lawyers too, right? The whole world does. But, they're easy targets. But.
Right. Well, and flip that. I mean, everybody I've talked to that has owned their own practice, though, I mean, it is, sometimes it's an ungodly amount of hours, right? Depending on what you're doing, if you're trying to get it off the ground, or, you're probably one of, if not the only person who's responsible for bringing in projects, at least at scale. And, the ebbs and flows of the economy, and the ebbs and flows of what's going on. I mean, that, it can be a ton of hours no matter what. It just seems like that level of fulfillment, that level of happiness it kind of makes it worth it, right? Makes it easier to get up in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, it requires dedication and passion. And I remember the first year that I started my firm, it was ungodly. It was like, over 80 hours a week, probably for the year on average. And, but I don't look back at that thinking that I was just exhausted and, and sort of dragging myself through this. I look back on it being like, that was invigorating. And,
right.
And I'll still put the time in now too. But it's, it's like always around every corner in what we do. It's, there's a new sort of design challenge to solve. There's a new opportunity to, shape an environment. They're just the dialogue and the discourse that we have around the work that we do it's all really invigorating. And
right.
I'm glad I chose this profession. Or
awesome.
happened along this way.
Now, did you always know that you wanted to open your own firm? Was that the plan from the beginning?
I don't know about the very beginning, but pretty early on. I think I have an entrepreneurial, streak in me that's been there since, high school. And, whether it was like, as a kid having a lawn mowing business, or, then like translating that into, other things. I've always sort of gravitated toward leadership positions and entrepreneurial positions. And so, this profession, like I think there's, for good reason, kind of an apprenticeship kind of phase for those who want to start their businesses. And I got a lot out of that. And but then at some point, like the kind of the alarm went off, and it was time to do it. And yeah, and I made the leap and started the firm. And that was 22 years ago at this point.
That's great. That's great. I'm hearing people talk about it in terms of phases like that. So kind of an apprenticeship phase, the very beginning, kind of the middle of your career where, you've got some experience under your belt and some projects under your belt, but there's still so much to learn. And then, the back half or back quarter of your career when, you're really just hitting your stride at that point, right? Like you've got all this experience and, whereas in maybe another profession, you might look at retirement earlier, things like that. There's architects designing
it's the exact opposite of a professional athlete.
I was just
right?
thinking that, yeah.
You come in and you hit your peak at like 28 or something, right? Instead, architects might not peak until they're 64,
right.
72. They're like Frank Gehry's still producing great
He
stuff.
is.
You look at any of the kind of the luminaries, the architects, but you look across the profession at everyone, and this is something you can do forever.
Right.
There's ways to do architecture, until you're very old, and I think you see a lot of people doing that because they want to do it.
Right. Not because they need to. It's not a it's
right.
not a money issue. It's a passion issue. So that's cool.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the favorite parts about your job on a daily basis?
Well, now one of my favorite parts about my job is interacting with all of our people, the people in the firm, and one of the things that we work pretty hard to do is to democratize design within the firm. So I set the vision for the firm's design direction, our design vision, but but I let we've created tools, we a set of tools that we call design vision, and those allow everyone in the firm to be designers, to from a very early stage let their design expression come into our work. And but those individual contributions are guided by the overall design vision, so that that there's a cohesive vision that comes out of sort of things that I've set. I maybe I'm like an orchestra leader, but everyone's playing an instrument, and so what I really love is those interactions, interactions with people on that level. I also love, walking a job site with a, either a younger architect or one of our more seasoned people, and, trying to break down a detail, or how do two materials intersect, and, how can we ensure that that's done in the most elegant fashion possible, and in a way that supports the overall design concept of one of our projects. It's all of those interactions, now, that I find really invigorating. And it's also sitting down for a design charrette, sketching, it's just the interactions with other people,
right?
Which in this day and age, it's the Zoomification of the world is that's I think hurt the most. I think our profession, across the profession, creative collaboration is I think it's the most difficult to do over Zoom, particularly if it involves more than two people.
Right.
Because it really only allows for like one. The tools just aren't as sophisticated for multiple individuals to interact and and collaborate. So
Right.
yeah, that's something that I feel like I'm feeling most acutely right now.
That's so what you just mentioned, the walking the job site, right? And that personal connection, being physically in the room with somebody and having that conversation, or being able to kind of glean those details if you're, somebody younger working with a mentor. That across every profession I've seen so far, that's been one of the hardest parts about quarantine and COVID is that. I mean, we have all the tools, we've got the internet, we've got all these crazy things right now, and we can pretty much make it work. But I remember early on in March and April, we were trying to figure out ways for architects to do site visits virtually, right? And there's drones, and there's, you can have somebody walk the site with a camera, or there's a number of ways to do that, but you lose something. And I don't quite know what it is, but you lose a little bit of that human interaction, that human contact of not, physically being there. And so I'm curious to see, maybe next year sometime, if we're finding some kind of hybrid version of that, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to expect, but I'm curious.
I mean, I think there's some things you can do virtually, but you really, you not being there in person, that removes something from the interaction. And we're we work really hard to try to make that work. And we follow the safety protocols, but we are on the job sites. And I think that having exposure to work that's underway is a huge part of growing as an architect. I mean, that's I referred earlier about to the construction management piece of my education, and that's that's something we work really hard to make sure our younger architects get exposure to that, exposure to the process, seeing, so you're not just drawing, steel and wood and drywall and and millwork, but you're actually seeing how those things go together and what you need to consider because you're seeing it in real life. And so we right now we're taking all the proper precautions, but we're still making a huge effort to make sure people are getting out and seeing work.
Right. That's so important, especially for the younger people, when you're trying to retain anybody, not just in the design world, letting somebody have a say, right? Say, hey, we want your opinion, right? You said that earlier. That's a really key thing to somebody feeling that sense of like, I want to show up and do a great job and be a part of this, versus kind of hiding, and feeling that old school mentality of like, just shut up and, put your head down. You're new, you'll learn eventually, right. But you're not a part of this now.
Right. Put in your years, and then you can start to talk at meetings.
Right. Talk to me later. Talk to me when you're old. It's like, oh man. So
yeah, we don't do it that way.
That's pretty cool. What would you say would be one of your biggest challenges along the way so far?
Well, I mean, I think that like some of the challenges in the early days, this is when I was first starting out in the profession, where, there was some self-doubt in that, like, oh, did I pick the right thing to do? Because I think that that's not uncommon with architects, because architecture requires proficiency in a lot of different areas. You need to know math, you need to know history, you need to know science, you need to know art, you need to be able to communicate, you need to do all these other things, which are skill sets that can take you a number of different directions. And so I think initially it was like, all right, is this the right synthesis of all of those, skills? And to which then, I overcame, and I think it's important to always question yourself, right? Like it's like, isn't that the Socratic kind of mean of thinking, the unexamined life's not worth living, right?
Right.
So you're always like, you should be questioning these things, and then through that questioning you get sort of more certainty and more and more confidence in what you're doing. And So, that was the initial one. And then I think, the next challenge was like starting the firm and really getting it going. I mean, it's like you're camping and you built you got to get a fire started, right? And so you get all the like kindling and like you have to get like the really, like the straw, and then you like strike the match, and that's starting the firm. And then you like, you blow on it and you really got to get it going. And then, once it's going, then you can like add the logs on and you can get the fire really, really burning. So I think that next part was starting the firm and like, how do you get over that hump? And then, and then once the firm's up and running, it's navigating it through different challenges. And, like the Great Recession, the current recession, those are challenges that that you're faced with, and you want to make sure that you steer the firm through it in the way that's best for everyone involved.
Right. So that leads perfectly into our next question, which is, can you talk a little bit about the business of architecture versus actual design? Because you spend a lot of time in school learning all types of concepts and design. It sounds like the business of architecture you might kind of have to figure out, on the fly a little bit more.
Yeah, they're very different things. And our schools, the architecture schools, I mean, there's so much to learn in the amount of time that you have in school. I mean, that's a real challenge. And, we would be probably because of that, not enough time would get spent on the business of architecture. So when I went and got the construction management degree, I thought that was going to be a quick, like 1 year in, 1 year out sort of thing. And sort of much to my chagrin, I found out that I was lacking an entire year of business prerequisites that they require of somebody to be in their master's program. So I had to spend a year taking business classes, which, I was like, I'm wasting a year of my life doing this. But then when it came time to, start the firm, oh man, all of those have proved hugely valuable. And so an example is when I started the firm, I started with, a project type. It was actually a multifamily, conversion of a theater into a multifamily lofts in a section of Denver, actually, because it was a connection with one of my high school friends. And I knew from the business class that diversification was important to be able to, to not be too overly saturated in one type of work. And so I very quickly, worked really hard to try to find other types of work to do. And so that's what's allowed us to now today grow, where we have 3 main studios. We have a residential studio where we do, primarily single family residential projects, but then we'll do some multifamily and we do hospitality work like wineries. We have our retail studio where that's retail, restaurant, and then we do a number of tenant improvement type projects out of, in the travel sector. And then we have commercial where we'll remodel, existing commercial buildings, and we'll do sort of workplace. But, the business background and the business piece of architecture really drove me to diversify the firm, build the firm that way. And then I put a lot of time and effort into and we as a firm now to sort of projecting our financials, so that we don't take unnecessary risks, so that we have predictability in our cash flow, things like that. And then we also invest very, very heavily in our people. And so we have a really sort of robust and well-developed kind of coaching and mentoring program that goes throughout the year and is tied to sort of annual goals and growth and things like that. And so that, each individual has their personal set of growth goals, and we work really hard to make sure that the opportunities the firm has align with, and we're able to connect people in with their own personal growth opportunities.
It's really smart. It's really smart. Oh man. I love it.
And it takes a lot of work. It takes a
I
lot of work. I mean, it when 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 perceived, hopefully it's like modern architecture. When you walk into a space, it might seem, it might have uh like it's beautifully refined. It might not have a lot of detail in it and everything, but the amount of effort and time that's required to go into creating a space like that, where the alignments all have to be perfect, a reveal has to match up with a material transition and everything. That's kind of the analogy I like to think of, is that we put all this time in behind the scenes so that the business experience, from somebody who's in the firm is one that's it's much cleaner.
right. Well, and talking about just matching people's skill sets, right? It's, if you use a sports analogy, when you have a new coach come in and you have a team kind of maybe not yet built to fit the scheme, do you spend a lot of time trying to force people to do something that's maybe not in their skill set, or do you adapt and just do what work with what you have and then morph that? And a lot of times, if you can do that,
So
second thing works.
we do something like that. So there is a development path for architecture, and there are skills and experience that you need to develop along the way. Some of them are really tangible skills, like understanding the building code, like the waterproofing detailing, things like that. Some of them are intangible, like how to communicate with a client, how to resolve a contentious situation, how to do those sorts of things. And so what we do is look at everyone, will have things that they need to develop and improve upon, to continue to progress. And that goes all the way up to me. Like, I'm continually learning and trying to get better at what I do. And there's I like as soon as I think I know something, then I learn that there's more to know, right? And so you always keep that mindset. But what we also do, using the sports analogy, is we try to capitalize on people's strengths. So it was explained to me, like like a basketball coach goes and he sees his big tall center out taking 3-point shots, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, my 3-point shooting is terrible. I really got to get better at this. And he's like, oh, well, that's great. Work on that. But you're our best rebounder. He's like, I need you rebounding too. Work on your rebounding, because if you're a great rebounder and you can be better, you're going to make us all better. And so that's the philosophy that we apply to that. It's, you got to work on the thing. There are things that you do need to work on and improve, but there are strengths that we want to capitalize. And and so how do we develop both of those things?
All right, that's great. Is there a project in your mind that either kind of stands out because of some specific meaning, or maybe a great learning opportunity, or just one that you look at and you're like, that was us, we did that one? Anything that comes to mind there?
Well, there are many. I mean, each project that we do has its unique sort of, we have our unique affection for that project and the process. There's a project that we did in Napa for a couple that is, they're major art collectors, and that project, I think, stands out sort of from a design perspective, as just a really great example of working with clients who believe in the ability. Architects are uniquely positioned to create art that can be lived in. And so that was this really great collaborative process with the clients who saw us as much as sort of, they expected us to have kind of functional expertise and building expertise, building systems expertise and things like that, and process expertise. But they also really valued and trusted that we were artists and were building, developing and creating a piece of art for them. And so, that I think that was a really great project and process in that, we the clients in doing that really got the greatest value out of us in both of those areas. So they now have this piece of architecture that is really habitable art, and and we had a great process to get from the conception of that all the way through to the completion of the project.
Right. Very cool. Can you think of one person or maybe a few people that stand out in your mind as people who have helped you along the way to get to where you're at? Either mentors or peers or teachers, something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. There was, a few of my professors, I can think of the professor who was maybe most successful at breaking me down, which is part of it. And I think that was, I look back and respect what she did in terms of challenging the notion of, do you want to be an architect? Like that was like, I think one of those periods of, that led to really deep introspection and caused me to be really passionate as a woman, my professor Andrea Simic at Cornell, and then there are others. One of my sort of mentors when I was working was a great architect in Los Angeles named Stephen Canner, and and he I worked with him on a number of projects and ended up running the retail practice of his firm right before I started my firm, and he just was a great mentor in terms of developing a kind of a persistence of vision around design ideas, and helping me learn how to overcome all of those challenges that are going to be presented that might diminish a design, or because like one of the things that architecture, what we have to do is like, it's not like you're going and creating a sculpture or a painting. We have building codes, we have budgets, we have like it's got to be waterproof, it's like all of those things, and so those constraints can challenge a project, and and you can bump up against them, and and I think it's I came out of these different experiences, and one of my mantras is creativity loves constraints, and constraints sort of can force you to focus your creativity, and that's how you can kind of find those little creative victories that you begin to pile up like bricks to create your overall creative success. And so yeah, the Stephen Canner was he really helped me understand persistence of vision.
Gotcha. Okay. Is there anybody that stands out in your mind as a leader in architecture? Maybe not necessarily, but somebody you've had direct contact with, but just somebody that you kind of look to when you're maybe thinking about making decisions about your firm or whatever that is?
So from the design perspective, I always I'm very inspired by Renzo Piano. I think that his contextual approach to design is it's just what he produces is so diverse, and what the studio produces, and it's not really egotistical. It's for the people and for the clients, and I find that very inspiring from a design perspective. And then, from a business perspective, I think there's a lot, like, I think I look to Gensler as a firm that's, is very well run, and Art Gensler has done a great job of just creating a culture there that, in a system that, a massive firm that still is, creating new work and inspiring new thought, but it's being run very efficiently and very effectively, and it's super rigorous about adherence to systems, and and it's just not sloppy in how it does any of that, and it's not chaotic. So I respect that from a business perspective.
Art Gensler was speaking at SFAIA. God, was it last year, maybe the year before? I don't remember. I missed it, and I was bummed. I think it was a documentary, and he came out and spoke. I think he did one in San Francisco and one in the North Bay somewhere, and I really would have enjoyed to see that. He's obviously the firm's massive firm, and he's done very well, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was that he was built on kind of the systems and things like that. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think he has a quote that architects shouldn't just be reading A+U and and Architectural Record and things like that, or the design magazines like GA. It's they need to be reading Forbes and Bloomberg and things like that. It's like there's a lot to what we do, and I view it from the perspective of my primary objective is to try to create the best work that can be possibly created, so that the work, because structure is going to be built in the world, but if we can populate the world with well-designed spaces that are sustainable and contextual, that are great members of their community, that are additive to their communities, then we're making the world a better place. And so the ability to do that most effectively includes running the business well,
right,
and interacting with the other team members, meaning the contractor, the engineers, the jurisdictional authorities, all of those people play a role, and the better and the more productively you can interact with all of them, the better you're going to be able to make the world a better place through great architecture.
Right. That business side, I think I read a stat somewhere that something like 80% seems way too high, but 80% of architects will be a sole proprietor at one point in their career, right? Will at least attempt to go out, they get a project, couple of projects, and they do it from home. And the lifestyle kind of lends itself to being able to do that, I think. But that business side, it's kind of what we talked about. It's a whole nother animal, right? It's just, and I had the fortune to help about 100, maybe for the last 2 years, about 200 designers who went and opened their own firms. And I'm starting to see some of them going back to larger firms now, right? As this economy starts to contract a little bit, there's definitely work. There are positions available for them, but that if they only had one particular client who was keeping them fueled, or one particular project type or niche that they hadn't diversified it, all of a sudden things changed pretty quickly. So
yeah, well, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
The two of our studio leaders had their own firms before coming to the WDA, and I think that they're better architects because of it.
Right.
They did it, they tried it, and then they decided that that's not what they wanted to do, and they wanted to be part of a larger organization. And
right.
And so if that's what one of our staff wants to do, we would help them build towards that goal. And and then they may go out and become wildly successful as their own firm, which would be fantastic.
Right.
Or they may maybe choose to come back,
right,
which also would be fantastic. I think
great.
it's it's part of that same concept of self-exploration. You got to try different things. And I think right now, this pandemic induced recession that we're in is going to be it's creating a lot of challenges. I think certain people are going to go back to larger firms. I think other people may start new firms. It's like this is catalyzing change right now, which is in and of itself, it's exciting. Once you get past kind of the pit in your stomach piece of hey, we got to get out of this.
Right.
Let's get beyond the pandemic and all the other
right.
challenges that the world's facing, Black Lives Matter and the election and all of that. So
right, it's been a hell of a year.
yeah, it sure has.
All right, so one more question for you here before we let you go.
All right.
What is the best advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional? And hopefully if we're talking maybe middle school or high school age, hopefully they're coming through the Architectural Foundation San Francisco program, and they're getting great training and mentorship. But if you had kind of things in particular that you would want to see from a student as they're progressing and getting licensed.
So I'll say the obvious, and we've kind of touched on it, is that find your passion for architecture and tap into that as your engine to motivate you to do all these other things. So I think that's sort of the sort of soaring ambition that I think and advice I would give. But the practically sort of the boots on the ground sort of advice would be develop, if the goal is to make yourself more hireable, develop skills that that are going to be valued at an entry level, which are is going to be some technical proficiency with the tools of the trade, the Revit or BIM modeling software, things like that, the understanding of the vernacular. But I think the for a high school student, middle school, high school, there is a skill that I don't think will ever be replaced in our profession and is underutilized today as a result of all the digital tools we have, which is sketching. I would say sketch all the time. Sketch the world around you, sketch large scale, right? Big buildings that you see across, sit yourself across the street from a big building and sketch it. And because sketching and drawing things makes you look at them closely and differently and increases your perception. So large scale, but then sketch small scale, look around your house, your apartment, or where, like a cafe or whatever, and draw, how does that window come into the wall, and draw all the different pieces of it, and then draw it again. And it's an amazing process. You're going to begin to, your mind will begin to open up and become a sponge to absorb all of this information that's in the world around you. And and then you're going to develop a tool that you'll use the rest of your life.
Right. That's great advice. And I think it's becoming a lost skill, right? I mean, these generations that are coming through middle school and high school now have had the internet their entire life, right? AutoCAD programs. I remember my dad worked for Autodesk in the late 90s. And he was so fascinated by this AutoCAD program because we were going to design our garden, just our little, front lawn, 20 by 20 garden, and he had a CAD program, and he was like, we're going to put this here. And he thought that was really cool. Little did we know 20 plus years later, I mean, that's, you don't see too many people drawing anymore, right? You don't see that, but
that's it.
Awesome.
The mid to mid 90s CAD programs, that was on 5 1/4-inch floppy disk where you put
right.
like 12 of them in, just load the program.
Oh, I love it. It was. I remember that.
Yeah.
William, thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate your time doing this. This was excellent.